The morning mist clung to the valley, curling around fence posts like pale tendrils. Ella Ward stood on her porch, a coffee mug warming her work-worn hands as she watched the sun fight its way through the December haze. At 73, she had come to cherish these quiet dawns, the stillness before the world awoke, the way frost made everything seem fresh and new, even the old family ranch that had stood for 4 generations. It had been 2 years since James passed. 2 years since the house felt this hollow, since she sold the cattle and most of the horses, keeping only her ancient mare Dolly, who was too old to rehome and too stubborn to leave anyway. The land seemed vaster now and lonelier, but Ella had made her peace with it, or so she told herself each morning when she woke to an empty bed and a silence that filled every room. She took a sip of coffee and peered toward the eastern pasture. Something was moving near the fence line. At first, she thought it might be a deer growing bold with winter hunger, but as the fog thinned, she saw it clearly. A horse. It stood at her fence, head hanging low, body perfectly still except for the occasional shudder along its ribs. Ella set down her mug, grabbed her barn coat and headed out, her boots crunching through the frost-stiff grass. As she drew closer, the horse lifted its head, and Ella's breath caught. The eyes that met hers were aged and weary, but held a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or hope. She had seen that look before in animals that had endured too much, waiting to see if this human meant more hardship or a moment of grace. "Easy now," she called softly as she approached. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The horse didn't move. That told her everything about its exhaustion. A healthy horse would have stepped back. This one just stood, swaying slightly, as if standing used the last of its strength. Ella reached the fence and stopped, taking in the full sight. The horse was worse up close. Its coat was matted with mud and what looked like old rain scald. Its mane was tangled with burrs. One front hoof was overgrown and cracked. An old rope burn circled its neck, the hair still missing in a cruel ring. But it was what sat on the horse's back that made Ella's heart stutter. A saddle, a weathered western saddle, its leather cracked and faded by years of sun and rain. And there, tooled into the leather on the rear skirt, barely visible under grime but unmistakable, was a name. James R. Ward. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. She stood frozen, staring at that saddle, that name, her mind racing backward through decades. It couldn't be, it wasn't possible. 23 years ago, James had commissioned that saddle from old Walter Barnes, the saddle maker in Red Creek. They'd been younger then, celebrating 30 years of marriage and the ranch finally turning a real profit. James had been so proud of it, working with Walter for months on every detail, full tooling, basket weave pattern, his name stamped into the leather because, as he joked, if he was spending that much, everyone should know it was his. He rode in that saddle for 5 years. It was his pride and joy broken in perfectly to his seat, the leather soft from daily use. Then one day it vanished. They'd been at the county fair showing quarter horses. James left the saddle on a rack outside the stalls for just 10 minutes to get lunch. When he returned, it was gone. Someone had walked off with it in broad daylight. James was devastated. He reported it stolen, checked every tack and pawn shop for 100 miles. He never found it. Eventually he bought another, but Ella knew it never felt right. He'd mention the stolen one every few months, usually while brushing down a horse. That Barnes' saddle sure would be nice for this, he'd say, and Ella would see the loss flash across his face. And now here it was on a half-starved horse at her fence, 2 years after James had died. Ella climbed through the fence rails, moving slowly, talking softly. "Where did you come from? How did you get my husband's saddle?" The horse watched her but didn't move. Up close, she saw he was a gelding, probably in his late 20s or early 30s. He'd been handsome once, good bone structure, kind eyes, the build of a ranch horse that had done honest work. Now he was a shadow of his former self. She reached out carefully, letting him smell her hand. He stretched his neck toward her, whiskers tickling her palm, and she felt him tremble, from cold, exhaustion, or fear, she couldn't tell. Maybe all three. "Come on then," she said gently. Let's get you to the barn." She opened the gate and walked toward the barn, not looking back, trusting he would follow. She heard the slow, uneven clip-clop of hooves behind her. He was following, one painful step at a time. The next few hours passed in a blur of urgent, careful work. Ella got the horse into a stall bedded deep with fresh straw. She removed the saddle with shaking hands, setting it aside. Underneath, the horse's back was raw in places, old pressure sores rubbed repeatedly. She winced, anger flaring hot in her chest. Someone had ridden this horse into the ground. She started with water, just a little at a time, worried he'd gorge himself. Then she called Dr. Rosemary Kearney, the vet who'd taken over when old Doc Stevens retired. Rosemary arrived within an hour, her truck rattling down the long driveway. In her 40s, she was efficient and compassionate in equal measure. She took one look at the horse and her mouth set in a grim line. "How long has he been here?" she asked, pulling on gloves. "Showed up this morning," Ella said, "less than 3 hours." Rosemary moved around the horse carefully, her hands gentle but thorough. She checked his heart, gut sounds, temperature. She examined his hooves, teeth, and coat. Finally, she stepped back and met Ella's eyes. "He's in bad shape, severely underweight, dehydrated, possible kidney issues given how dark his urine is. Those pressure sores are infected. His hooves haven't been trimmed in at least a year, and he's old. I'd say 30, maybe 32, but he'll make it," Ella asked, surprised by her own hope. Rosemary hesitated. "If you'd found him a week later, probably not. As it is, he's got a chance, but it's a long road. Months of careful feeding, daily wound care, farrier work. And at his age, there's no guarantee." "I'll do it," Ella said immediately. "Whatever it takes." Rosemary smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that." She pulled out her prescription pad. "Let's start with antibiotics for the sores. I'll show you how to clean them. Feed him small amounts every 4 hours. Beet pulp, senior feed, good hay. His system needs to remember how to process food again." They worked together for another hour, Rosemary showing Ella how to clean wounds, check for fever, what signs to watch for. Before leaving, Rosemary paused at the stall door. "The saddle," she said, "is that really your husband's?" Ella nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then this horse came home for a reason," Rosemary said softly. "Horses always know where they need to be." That first week, Ella barely slept. She set an alarm for every 4 hours, trudging to the barn in the dark and cold, mixing feeds, checking the horse. She'd cleaned the saddle carefully, and there was no doubt. She found the maker's mark under the stirrup leather, Walter Barnes' distinctive stamp, the year, everything. The horse, she'd started calling him Reggie, a name that seemed to fit, improved slowly. By the 3rd day, he was drinking water willingly. By the 5th, he nickered softly when she entered the barn. By week's end, he was eating hay with more enthusiasm, his eyes brighter, his head held a little higher. Ella found herself spending hours in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, watching Reggie eat, talking to him the way she used to talk to James at the kitchen table. "You know, I kept telling myself I was fine," she said one night, listening to the rhythmic sound of chewing. "Everyone said I was handling it so well. Ella's so strong," they'd say. "Look how well she's managing." And I believed them. I thought I was doing okay. Reggie paused his eating and looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the barn light. "But the truth is, I've just been going through the motions. Getting up, feeding Dolly, working in the garden, going to town once a week. The same routine over and over, as if staying busy meant I wouldn't have to think about how much I miss him." She wiped her eyes, surprised to find tears. "And then you show up wearing his saddle, and suddenly I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep busy enough to ignore it. You needed help so badly. And I realized maybe I need help too. Maybe we both need saving." Reggie came to the stall door and stretched his neck over, his nose almost touching her knee. She reached up and stroked his face, feeling the soft warmth of his muzzle, his gentle breath. "We're going to get through this," she whispered. Both of us. As Reggie grew stronger, Ella became obsessed with the mystery. How had he ended up with James's saddle? Where had he been for 23 years? She started making calls, checking with the county sheriff, posting on local social media groups about the found horse. The break came 2 weeks after Reggie arrived. A woman named Linda Gibson called, her voice shaking. "I saw your post about the horse," she said. I think he might have belonged to my ex-husband, Frank." Ella invited her over that afternoon. Linda was in her 60s, thin and tired-looking, with the weariness that comes from years of hard living. She walked into the barn and stopped when she saw Reggie. "Oh God," she breathed, "that's Dash." "Frank's horse, Dash," Ella repeated. Linda nodded, tears streaming. "Frank bought him about 20 years ago at an auction, bought the saddle too, said he got a good deal on both. I always thought it looked like a nice saddle. But Frank wasn't a nice man." She told the story in fits and starts, sitting on a hay bale. Frank had been a drinker, a gambler, and increasingly cruel. He took his frustrations out on the horses, especially Dash, whom he'd ridden hard and neglected constantly. "I left him 5 years ago," Linda said. "Went to my sister's in Nevada. I didn't take Dash because Frank wouldn't let me, and I was just trying to get out alive. I always felt guilty about leaving that horse." "What happened to your ex-husband?" Ella asked. "He died 3 months ago, heart attack. I came back to settle his estate, what little there was. The property was a disaster. I found 2 horses, both in terrible shape. I managed to catch one and get it to a rescue, but Dash, he must have gotten out somehow. I looked for him for weeks." She shook her head. "I thought he died somewhere. I'm so sorry. I should have tried harder." Ella felt a surge of understanding. "You were surviving, I understand that." Linda looked at Reggie Dash with deep sadness. "Is he going to be okay?" "He's getting there," Ella said, slowly but surely. Linda stood and walked to the stall, reaching through the bars to touch the horse's neck. He leaned into her hand and Linda sobbed. "I'm so sorry, boy, I'm so sorry I left you with him. You're not responsible for your ex-husband's cruelty," Ella said firmly. "And Dash found his way here. He's safe now." Before leaving, Linda signed over any claim to the horse. "He deserves better than I could give him anyway," she said. "Looks like he found it." Winter deepened, and with it, the bond between Ella and Reggie. She kept the name, deciding it suited this new chapter. Every day brought small improvements. The wounds on his back healed. His ribs became less visible. His coat, once dull, began to show hints of its original deep black. The farrier, a kind man named Bill Castro, came every 2 weeks to gradually correct Reggie's hooves. Whoever had him wasn't trimming him, but they were riding him, Bill said, shaking his head. "That's about as cruel as it gets." Ella's daughter, Diana, drove up from Denver for Christmas. She stood in the barn watching her mother feed Reggie and smiled. "You look different, Mom." "Different how?" "Alive. You look alive again." Ella realized it was true. For the first time since James died, she had a purpose beyond survival. She had someone depending on her. The alarm every 4 hours wasn't an interruption anymore. It was a reminder she was needed. She started riding Dolly again, just gentle walks. Sometimes she'd pony Reggie alongside, letting him stretch his legs without a rider's weight. He moved stiffly at first, but gradually his stride lengthened, his head came up, and Ella saw glimpses of the horse he must have been in his prime. On New Year's Eve, she sat in the barn with both horses, a small heater taking the edge off the cold. She'd brought out James's saddle, cleaned and oiled, the leather restored as much as possible, and worked on it with saddle soap, the familiar smell bringing back memories. "You would have loved him," she said, not sure if she was talking to James or Reggie or both. "He's a good horse, strong heart, a fighter." She ran her hand over James's name, tooled into the leather all those years ago. "I used to think it was sad you never got this back. You loved this saddle, but maybe it was supposed to be this way. Maybe it had to go on this journey through hard years, carrying Reggie through his darkness so it could bring him here." "Bring him home," Reggie nickered softly, and Ella smiled. "Yeah, you're home, and so am I. I think I've been lost too, boy, just in a different way." March brought warming winds and the first hints of green. Reggie had transformed. He'd gained nearly 200 pounds. His coat gleamed, his eyes, once dull, now sparked with interest. He whinnied when Ella approached, not from hunger but from pleasure at seeing her. Dr. Rosemary came for a follow-up and stood looking at Reggie with amazement. "Ella, this is remarkable. I wasn't sure he'd make it through the winter. And look at him. He's a tough old man," Ella said proudly. Rosemary checked him over. "He's sound too. I wouldn't ride him hard, but he could handle gentle trail rides if you wanted." Ella had been thinking about that. She'd been thinking about how empty the ranch had felt and how full it felt now. About how she'd shut down after James died. About how this horse had needed saving and in doing so had saved her too. "I've been thinking about taking in more," she said suddenly. "More horses. Old ones, unwanted ones. Horses like Reggie who need a soft place to land for their final years. I've got the land, the facilities, and I've got the time. James would have liked that. He always said horses gave us more than we ever gave them." Rosemary's face broke into a wide smile. "That's a beautiful idea, Ella. There are always horses that need exactly that kind of home." The idea took root. Ella started making calls, reaching out to rescues, saying she'd take in senior horses with nowhere else to go. Within a month, she'd taken in 3 more. A 30-year-old mare named Buttercup who'd outlived her owner, a 28-year-old gelding named Pepper with arthritis, and a 25-year-old Mustang named Dancer who'd gone lame. The ranch came alive again. The barn was full of sounds, horses nickering, munching hay, the gentle thump of hooves. Ella hired help, a young woman named Jenna who just graduated from an equine program. "This is incredible," Jenna said on her first day. "What you're doing here is really special." Ella smiled, watching the horses eat. "It's necessary. These horses spent their lives working for people. The least we can do is give them peace at the end." Late April brought a perfect spring day. Ella had been thinking about it for weeks, and finally she made her decision. She brought James's saddle out of the tack room. She'd thought about keeping it as a memorial, never using it again, but that felt wrong. James had been a horseman. He'd wanted that saddle made for riding, for work, for life. Keeping it pristine would have made him shake his head. Reggie stood in the paddock, enjoying the sun. At about 30, he was elderly but healthy now, his body strong in a way it probably hadn't been in years. "What do you say, boy?" Ella called. "Want to see what this feels like?" She saddled him carefully, James's saddle settling onto his back for the first time without causing pain. She used a thick pad, careful of the old scars. Reggie stood quietly, patient, as if he understood the moment's significance. Ella swung into the saddle, feeling the familiar creak of leather, the way it molded to her seat, just as it had to James's years ago. Reggie stood still, waiting, then at her gentle cue walked forward. They moved slowly across the property, Reggie's gait easy and relaxed. Ella felt tears streaming down her face, not from sadness but from completion, from circles closing, from things coming home. "James," she whispered, "I wish you could see this. Your saddle came back. It brought me a horse that needed saving, and in saving him I saved myself. Isn't that just like you, always teaching me something even now?" They rode to the eastern pasture, where James had always said the view was best. Ella stopped Reggie there and sat, looking out over the family land she'd shared with James for 52 years. "I'm going to be okay," she said out loud. "I'm going to keep living, really living, not just going through the motions. I'm going to fill this ranch with horses that need love. I'm going to make a difference. That's what you'd want, isn't it?" The wind picked up, warm and gentle, rustling through the new grass. And maybe it was just her imagination, but Ella could have sworn she felt James there with her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice saying what he always said when she doubted herself. "You've got this, Ella, you always have." By June, Ella's place had transformed. She'd officially registered as a non-profit sanctuary for senior horses, naming it Second Sunset Ranch after James's favorite saying. "Every day you wake up is a chance for a second sunrise, and every day you make it through is a second sunset to be grateful for." The ranch now housed 7 horses, each with a story of hard use, neglect, or simply outliving their purpose. Ella and Jenna, with volunteers, cared for them all. Reggie became the unofficial greeter. When new horses arrived, frightened and confused, Reggie would stretch his neck over his stall door and nicker softly, a sound of reassurance. The newcomers always calmed at his presence, as if recognizing a fellow survivor. Diana visited more often, sometimes bringing her teenage son Michael, who discovered he loved working with the horses. Ella watched her grandson learn to curry, brush, clean hooves and measure feed, and she saw James in his gentleness. Grandma Michael asked one day, why do people give up on horses just because they get old? Ella considered carefully. I think sometimes people forget that these horses gave them their youth, their strength, their hearts. They get focused on what's useful and forget what's right. But that's why places like this exist, to remember for them, to honor what these horses gave. The local newspaper did a story, then a Denver TV station picked it up. Donations started coming in, hay, supplements, money for vet care. People from across the state asked if Ella could take in their aging horses. She couldn't take them all, but she took as many as she could manage, always putting the horses' welfare first. The ranch that had felt so empty now rang with life. In late July, Ella received a letter forwarded by the county sheriff, son of the saddle maker. Dear Mrs. Ward, it read, "My father passed away last year, and while settling his affairs, I came across his old records. I saw he made a saddle for your husband in 2002, and I remembered him mentioning it had been stolen. He always felt bad about that. He took pride in his work, and it bothered him that someone who appreciated craftsmanship had lost something he'd made. I saw the news story about your sanctuary and how your husband's saddle found its way back to you. My father would have loved that. He always said his saddles were meant to work, to be part of people's and horses' lives. Knowing his saddle traveled so far and brought you together with a horse that needed you would have made him smile. If you ever need repairs, please reach out. I've taken over my father's business, and I'd be honored to maintain his work free of charge. Some things are more important than money. Respectfully, Walter Barnes, Jr." Ella sat on her porch, the letter in her lap, and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense that everything had happened exactly as meant to be. The saddle stolen, the years carrying Reggie through hardship, the journey that brought them both here. It was all connected, all purposeful. She wrote back that evening, thanking him and telling the full story, inviting him to visit. September brought cooler nights and the first yellow leaves on the aspens. Reggie stood in the paddock with Buttercup and Pepper, the three dozing in the afternoon sun. Nearly 9 months since he'd appeared, he was completely transformed. Glossy black coat, bright eyes, body strong despite his age. Ella stood watching him, Dolly beside her. She thought about Reggie's journey, her own journey, the saddle's journey. She thought about James and how much she still missed him, but also how the grief no longer defined her days. Rosemary stopped by for checkups and found Ella organizing supplies. You know, Rosemary said, "When I first came out last December, I thought you might be taking on too much. One malnourished horse, winter coming, you grieving. I worried it would break you." Ella smiled. "I worried too, but instead you built this." Rosemary gestured around the barn. "You created something beautiful from pain. Both of you did, you and Reggie." "He saved me as much as I saved him," Ella said, "maybe more." That evening, Ella saddled Reggie one more time. They rode out to the eastern pasture, the same route as that first ride in April. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. She dismounted and stood beside Reggie, one hand on James's saddle, one on the horse who'd carried it home. She thought about how lost she'd been 2 years ago, how hollow the ranch felt, how she'd been going through the motions without really being alive. "Thank you," she whispered to Reggie. "Thank you for coming here. Thank you for needing me. Thank you for showing me there's still purpose, still meaning, still life to be lived." Reggie turned and nuzzled her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. Ella looked up at the sky, at the emerging stars. "We did good, didn't we, James? This old horse, this old saddle, this old ranch. We gave them all new life and they gave me mine back." The wind whispered through the grass. A coyote called in the distance. Horses in the barn nickered evening greetings. Ella stood, her hand on Reggie's neck, and felt something she hadn't in 2 years. She felt whole. Second Sunset Ranch celebrated its 1-year anniversary with an open house. Over 100 people came to tour, meet the horses, and hear their stories. Ella stood in the barn watching children pet Reggie as she told his story, how he appeared carrying her late husband's stolen saddle, how he'd been barely alive, how he'd healed and helped her heal too. Reggie stood patiently, letting small hands stroke his face, his eyes calm and kind. He was about 31 now, elderly by horse standards, but healthy, content, and loved. The ranch housed 12 horses with plans to expand. Donations and volunteer support had grown beyond expectations. She'd hired 2 full-time staff, and Michael had deferred college for a year to work at the ranch. As the sun set and visitors left, Ella walked through the barn one last time, checking water and hay nets. She paused at Reggie's stall where he munched contentedly. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boy?" she said softly. Reggie lifted his head and nickered, that gentle sound of recognition and affection that always warmed her heart. Ella reached out and ran her hand along his neck, feeling the strong, steady pulse of life beneath her fingers. James's saddle hung on a rack nearby, still used for gentle rides, a reminder of the long, unexpected journey that brought an old horse and an old woman together, saving them both. Outside, the sun completed its descent, painting the sky one last time before darkness fell. Another sunset, another day survived and celebrated. Ella smiled. Life had a way of bringing you exactly what you needed, even when you didn't know you needed it. Sometimes salvation came wearing a worn saddle and carrying an unexpected story. Sometimes healing arrived on 4 legs, half-starved and desperate, teaching you that you were strong enough to save someone else, and in doing so save yourself. "Good night, Reggie," Ella whispered. "Thank you for finding your way home." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that celebrate the incredible bond between horses and people. Have you ever experienced an unexpected connection with a horse that changed your life? Share your story in the comments below. We love reading them. And remember, senior horses everywhere need loving homes in their final years. Consider supporting a local horse rescue or sanctuary. Every small act of kindness makes a difference. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep the spirit of the horse alive in your heart. He horse alive in your heart.